Do you believe that in just a moment, a life can be saved? That a small act can change a life? Today, we will witness a story that you will never forget. An abandoned puppy, seriously ill, lying quietly waiting to die. No one wanted to save it. No one believed that it had any hope. But then, an 8-year-old girl appeared. And what happened next will leave you speechless. What made her act? How did a small creature, who seemed to have lost all hope, find a new life? Before we continue, comment, where in the world are you watching this video? And if you believe in touching stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel now, because tomorrow there will be a special story for you. One late fall afternoon, the Texas sky was a pale orange as Sophie's family car pulled up to a small rescue shelter on the outskirts of Austin. The wind blew gently through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and the first chill of the season. Sophie, an 8-year-old with bright blue eyes and curly blonde hair, jumped out of the car, filled with excitement. She had been looking forward to this day for months, the day she would find a 4-legged friend to share her childhood with. Inside the shelter, barks rang out excitedly. Dozens of dogs, big and small, strong and healthy, pressed against the bars, wagging their tails as they saw people enter. Every living thing here was waiting for a chance to be loved. Sophie walked, her eyes scanning each cage, but then she stopped. In a dark corner at the end of the cages, a golden retriever puppy lay quietly, not moving at all. Its once glossy fur was patchy and ragged. Its eyes were sunken and dull with exhaustion. Not a whimper, not a wagging tail, just resignation and an endless sadness. Sophie held her breath. What had happened to this boy? Why, amid the loud barking, was a life slowly dying in silence? She turned to a nearby shelter worker. What's wrong with that dog? The man in the blue coat leaned down and sighed. His name is Cooper, little girl. He was abandoned on the streets, malnourished and sick. We tried, but no one wanted to adopt a dying dog. The words rang out like a thunderclap from the blue sky. Sophie clenched her hands, her eyes never leaving Cooper. So, what if no one takes him in? There was a tense silence. The rescuer answered slowly. We have no choice. Cooper is at his limit. Today is his last day. The air froze. Sophie took a step back. Her whole body froze. What did he mean? What did he mean by his last day? But before Sophie could ask more, she saw the man bend down, open a drawer, and take out a syringe filled with clear liquid. A nurse walked over and opened the cage door. Cooper still didn't move. Everything happened so fast. Suddenly, Sophie lunged forward. Stop! Please don't! A scream tore through the silence, shocking the room. The rescuer stopped, the nurse froze, and the other dogs fell silent. Only the small girl, panting, stood in front of Cooper, her eyes filled with panic and pleading. She didn't know what made her act so quickly. All she knew was her heart clenched as she saw the needle approaching Cooper. Please don't do this, Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. He's still alive? No one in the room said anything. They were all surprised by her reaction. A few adults looked at each other, their eyes filled with sympathy and doubt. Another staff member spoke softly. Sweetheart, it's the rules. Sometimes we have to accept. Accept? Sophie spun around, her eyes glistening with tears. Accept that he's unlovable just because he's sick. If it were me, if I were sick like that, would anyone abandon me? No one answered. It was a simple question, but it left all the adults in the room speechless. Sophie turned around and knelt in front of the cage. She reached out a small, trembling hand to touch the bars. Cooper stirred slightly. A faint breath. A faint, hopeful lick. And in that moment, Sophie knew. What should the girl do? Sophie knelt beside the cage, her small hands trembling as she slid through the gap between the cold bars. Cooper was still lying there, breathing weakly. But when he felt the warmth of her hand, he leaned forward, his cold nose brushing against her palm. It was a small, slight movement, but to Sophie, it was a miracle. She looked deep into those cloudy eyes. She saw no despair, no resignation. Behind the cloud of illness, there was still a faint light, a fragile light of life, a hope that had not yet been completely extinguished. How could they think of ending a life when that light was still there? The rescuer sighed, his voice low but firm. Cooper is very sick, little girl. He's malnourished, his immune system is weak, and he has a bowel disease. Even if we bring him back, there's no guarantee he'll survive. And if he can't walk, can't eat, can't run, do you think he'll be happy? Sophie didn't take her eyes off Cooper. Happiness isn't determined by health alone, she whispered. The man was momentarily taken aback. No one expected an 8-year-old girl to say something so profound. But Sophie didn't need to think too much. She was just saying what her heart told her to. She turned to her parents, her eyes filled with pleading. I can take care of him. We can take him to a doctor. We can help him get better. I promise. I'll do anything. Just give Cooper a chance. Sophie's parents looked at each other. This wasn't what they'd planned. They had intended to adopt a healthy dog, a happy companion for their daughter, not a creature on the precipice of life and death. But then they looked into Sophie's eyes. They weren't just those of a little girl asking or pleading. They were the eyes of someone who had seen something no one else could see. Someone who believed in a miracle that adults no longer dared to believe in. How could they refuse when their daughter's heart had made up its mind? Sophie's father sighed, leaning down to place a hand on her shoulder. We'll try. A moment of silence. Sophie blinked, not believing what she had just heard. Really? Her voice cracked with happiness. Her mother nodded, but her eyes were still filled with worry. But you must understand, this is not an easy task. If we adopt Cooper, you'll have to take care of him. Be patient. Accept that maybe he won't make it. Sophie turned to look at Cooper. She couldn't explain it, but deep down, she knew he would live. She just knew he deserved a chance. I understand, she said, her voice more certain than ever. The rescuer hesitated, but finally, he opened the cage door. Cooper was too weak to stand, but when Sophie gently wrapped her arms around him, something unexpected happened. A soft sigh, almost a moan, but not of pain, of relief. For the first time in a long time, Cooper was held. For the first time in a long time, he knew he wasn't alone. On her way home, Sophie kept looking down at Cooper in her arms. His breathing was faint, but still there. Softly, she whispered, "You'll be fine, Cooper. I promise." But was it? Was a little girl's love enough to save a life on the brink of death? Was Cooper strong enough to continue on a path that seemed destined to end? And was this a second chance, or just a glimmer of light before the final darkness? Sophie didn't know, but she believed. And sometimes, it only takes one person to believe for a miracle to begin. Cooper was brought home to Sophie in a soft blanket, curled up in her arms like a precious gift. But as soon as he stepped into this new world, he did not jump up and down like other puppies. wag his tail eagerly, or stretch out to welcome loving arms. He just lay there, quiet as a shadow, his breath as fragile as a candle in the wind. Sophie laid him down on the small bed she had prepared in advance, her eyes full of hope, but Cooper just curled up slightly, as if even changing positions was too great a challenge. The first days passed in anxiety. Cooper was so weak that he could not lift his head to eat. Every time Sophie reached out to stroke him, he only moved slightly, his tired eyes opening for a moment and then closing again as if the world was too heavy for him to bear. The vet came to visit on the third day. "This boy has suffered too much," he sighed after checking Cooper's weak heartbeat. "I don't want to upset her, but he might not make it." Sophie heard that. She clenched her hands into fists. "What can I do to help him?" The doctor looked at her, his eyes full of sympathy. "Love, Sophie? He's lived a hard life. The only thing he needs now is a reason to live." A reason to live. Those words echoed in Sophie's mind all night. Cooper had been abandoned and considered hopeless. But if she could make him feel important, could make him understand that he was worthy of love, would that be enough to keep him fighting? The next morning, Sophie set out on a mission she had never done before. She set her alarm clock to wake up early every morning, just to sit next to Cooper and whisper in his ear, "You'll be fine, Cooper. I believe in you." She brought spoonfuls of food to his mouth, patiently waiting for him to swallow each bite. She wrapped Cooper in soft blankets, keeping him warm, even though she was starting to feel cold because she forgot to put on a coat. At night, she kept a small lamp by Cooper's bed because she was afraid he would feel lonely in the dark. Sophie never gave up, but there was one thing she didn't realize. Somewhere, deep in Cooper's weary heart, something was changing. A week passed. One morning, when Sophie woke up, she discovered something that almost made her cry. The bowl of food she had left last night was almost half empty. The little girl rushed to hug Cooper, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You ate! You ate!" Cooper couldn't speak, but Sophie swore that in that moment, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. A small spark of life. And then the magic began. On the 10th day, Cooper wagged his tail for the first time. It was just a small, tiny movement, but it was enough to make Sophie jump for joy. On the 15th day, when Sophie put her hand on his back, he leaned his head into her palm, his eyes full of trust. On the 20th day, Cooper tried to stand, his legs still shaking, but Sophie knew. He was fighting. The neighbors began to notice. Those who had thought Sophie was wasting their time with a hopeless dog now began to quietly watch Cooper's progress. And then, one particular morning, Sophie woke up and walked down the stairs. The first thing she saw made her cover her mouth to keep from crying out loud. Cooper, the dog who had been unable to stand, was walking toward her, his legs weak but determined. His eyes lit up with something she had never seen before. Life. Sophie fell to her knees, arms outstretched. Cooper stumbled a little, but then he picked up speed, ran toward her, and for the first time in his life, jumped into Sophie's arms like a real dog. She hugged him tightly, laughter mixed with tears. She didn't give up, and more importantly, Cooper didn't give up. We often think that to save someone, we need power, money, or a miracle. But sometimes, all we have to do is believe in them when no one else does. How many Coopers are there out there, the hopeless, the forgotten, who just need someone like Sophie to give them a chance? And if we had the chance to be that person, would we take it? Cooper was no longer the weak puppy huddled in the corner of his cage. He now ran around Sophie's garden, his tail wagging whenever she came home. His eyes were no longer clouded with illness, but bright with joy, with life. But not everyone believed that a dog who had been abandoned could become harmless. The neighbors looked at Cooper with suspicion. They had heard his story. A dog who had been abandoned, once weak to the point of death. A dog that no one thought was worth saving. The suspicion came not from malice, but from fear. How could a dog who had been through so much be gentle? Was he safe? Would his past traumas one day turn him into a savage? Sophie heard the gossip, but she paid it no attention. She knew who Cooper was. She knew his heart was purer and more loving than anyone she had ever met. But then one day, everyone understood that sometimes the creatures we save become the ones who save us. That afternoon, Sophie and Cooper went to the park near their house with their parents. It was a beautiful spring day. The wind blew gently. The lake reflected the pale yellow sunlight. Sophie and Cooper played on the grass, running around as if the whole world belonged to them. Then a moment of carelessness. Sophie ran too fast. Her little feet tripped over a root protruding from the ground. She lost her balance. Her body flew forward and fell into the cold lake. It all happened too fast. A scream rang out. The adults in the park turned around in surprise, but they were too far away. Only one creature did not hesitate for even a second. Cooper. No one needed to give orders. There was no need for hesitation. He shot toward the lake like a golden bolt of lightning, his feet kicking off the ground. Splash! The water splashed into hundreds of tiny droplets, sparkling in the sunlight. Sophie struggled, her hands trying to grab onto anything, but panic pulled her under. The cold seared into her skin, and her breath hitched. Then suddenly, a familiar weight touched her. A pair of teeth gently but firmly grabbed her by the collar, pulling her up from the deep water. Cooper. He swam powerfully, his legs kicking with determination. Sophie felt his warm breath, felt his heartbeat. There was no more fear. She knew he would get her to shore. The adults ran over, a pair of arms pulling Sophie up from the water. Gasps, screams, cries. But through it all, Sophie heard only one thing. Cooper's strong heartbeat as he pulled himself up from the water, soaking wet, but standing before her like a loyal protector. He had saved her. The once doubting neighbors stood in silence. They had just witnessed something that no amount of gossip could deny. Cooper was more than just a dog who had been abandoned. He was a hero. The story of Cooper and Sophie spread far and wide. The local press carried the story of the dog who had been considered hopeless, but who, thanks to the love of a little girl, had been given a whole new life, and he had responded without hesitation. Cooper became the center of admiration. But to Sophie, he was still just the friend she trusted, the friend she saw the light in even when the world turned its back on him. One evening, as Sophie sat beside Cooper on the front steps, she whispered, "Mom and Dad say I saved you. But actually, you saved me first, right?" Cooper didn't answer, but he put his head on her chest, wagging his tail gently, as if to say that they had always saved each other in their way. We often think of our actions as small things, a momentary decision, a meaningless choice, a fleeting word. But have you ever wondered what would have happened if Sophie hadn't screamed that day? If she hadn't stopped the lethal injection? If she hadn't believed in Cooper when no one else did? Would Cooper still exist? Would Sophie have her most loyal friend? And will he be there in time to save her at the most crucial moment? We never know the consequences of a small action, but perhaps it is those small actions that change the world. How many Coopers are out there, abandoned, hopeless creatures, waiting for someone like Sophie? And if tomorrow you caught a look like Cooper's that day, what would you do? Are you willing to be the one to change someone's life? Or will you walk away as if you never saw anything? This story may have ended, but perhaps a new story has just begun. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen to this story. Out of all the millions of options out there, you chose to stay until the end, and that means more than anything. Thank you for joining Sophie and Cooper on this emotional journey. Thank you for letting your heart be moved, for allowing yourself to believe that good things still exist. It is your support and love that allows stories like this to be told, to be shared, to reach more people. There is no shortage of miracles in this world. Sometimes they come from the smallest things, from a weak wagging of a tail, from a hand extended at the right moment, from someone willing to listen. And today, you are a part of that miracle. So if this story has touched you, if it has made you smile, cry, or think about something deeper, please leave a comment and let us know. How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? We'd love to hear what you think. If you think this story is worth sharing, please like to help it reach more people. And if you believe many more meaningful stories are waiting to be told, please share to spread the message of love. But don't leave yet. Countless other stories will surprise, move, and inspire you even more. What if one day, a dog that was once considered worthless became a hero? What if a person who had been knocked down stood up and changed the world? Subscribe and turn on notifications because the next story might be just what you've been looking for. And who knows? It might change your life in ways you never imagined.